So today we have Rabbi Haim Ovadia from Rockville, Maryland, the Magen David Synagogue. Rabbi, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
So my background, I wrote about it once. It's very much influenced by my grandfather. I was born in Yerushalayim. My grandfather is Hacham Ftaya. His father, Abid Ftaya, comes from a line of maybe 10 generations of rabbis, all the way back to, I think Rabbi was a Reuven David Nawi, who came to Baghdad from Syria in like the late 17th century. So they had a long rabbinic tradition at home, like a family and all that. And this is what they call shimusha. You know how the rabbis worked with the community for the people and all that. Rabbi Aftaya was started as a student of his father, Rabbi Moshe, and of the Ben Ish Hai, and then he moved on to become a colleague of the Ben Ish Hai, and he studied with him both Kabbalah, Halacha, and all that. He was the leader of the community. And my grandfather, Rabbi Hacham Shaul, didn't want to be involved in the rabbinate. He felt that it's, I wouldn't say corrosive, it's very difficult for the rabbi to be in this position vis-a-vis the community. But he was a social activist, you could say. He was very involved when he came to Israel, helping the poor, the needy, especially people from Sephardic background, particularly the Iraqi community. So he established an organization to help academics from the Sephardi, from the Iraqi community. It's called Akademaim Oli Bavel, to help them get into the positions in the university and all that. So we had a very strong sense of pride in the knowledge and tradition of the Sephardi community. And my sister is a professor of philosophy and Kabbalah in Ben Gurion University. I chose a different path. So a lot of what I do and how I teach is informed by his approach of trying to find a way for Judaism to work for people, not against the people, and understanding that in Halacha, you have many different views, and you have to combine a sense of caring for the community, understanding history, understanding the text. They all have to come together. Nothing is isolated. I think I wrote about it also once that I'm not comfortable, or I don't accept the term meta halacha. It's very common today in the modern Orthodox conversation. We speak about meta halacha, and I say that there's no such thing as a meta halacha. Everything is halacha. When you talk about someone's emotions, financial situation, history, or where will he end or she will end up if they follow a certain path, this is all part of halacha. You can't isolate and say, okay, we'll look at the written word is halacha and everything around it is external, and we're doing someone a favor by considering it. Everything is part of it. Yeah.
This sounds like the idea of someone creating, let's say, a hazaka for themselves or minhag or personal halacha. I mean, when you say it's halacha, do you mean it's mamash halacha l'maaseh for everybody, or just something like a practice? Because the problem with this is with who creates it. Like, if it's our leaders, they may call it a binding halacha. When it's something more like a minhag, right? I mean, to this, or when you challenge them with this, it will say, minhag Yisrael Torechi, or minhag Yisrael Dinhu. When these statements only justify the minhagim put in place by the Beit Din HaGadol themselves, no? It's almost like if a rabbi had a custom or practice of cooking chicken a certain way before Shabbat, and now everyone feels they have to cook the chicken in that way, no?
Yeah. No, that is separate. I mean, Hagim, Takanot, and all this, each one of them has its history. I'm saying that when you as a rabbi, you have to deal with the new questions that came up. Let's say it's a completely new set of circumstances that never existed before. Let's say organ donation, or cloning, or electricity on Yom Tov or on Shabbat. All those things don't really have a precedent. Now you look at it, or you look at it at a case that does have precedent, like Eruv, right? Are we supposed to try to find easier ways for people to carry on Shabbat, right? So you don't just look at the dry text of halacha saying, okay, we have two definitions of what is Reshut Rabim. The width has to be 16 amot, and 16,000 people travel there daily. Those are the parameters of halacha. If we have them, according to Ashkenazim, we need both. If not, it's Reshut Rabim. According to Rabim, one is enough. That's it. End of the story. No, you look this, for example, what Rabbi Asher did when he lived in Meknes. You look at the situation around you. You see that people carry. No matter what you do, people do carry on Shabbat. I look around me, and I see that the question of having or not having an eruv affects people in the decisions they make, where to buy a house, which school to send their kids to, which community to live in, and that has a reverberation. It affects everything. So all these considerations are part of the equation. When I say, okay, we have two classically defined opinions of what is Reshut Rabim, but we have a lot of material around it, from the Rishonim, from the Gemara. We have historical evidence. We have personal testimonies, like I know what I heard from my grandfather, etc. So we take all these into account and we say, can we find a solution? Not kiruv, not to say we justify what the people are doing. No, to say, is it allowed or forbidden? That is what I mean when you take everything into the discussion.
Isn't it safer to just call it something else? Because I could understand how the Haredim would have an issue with this, because you begin to blur the lines. Nowadays, if, for example, YCT comes up with an idea and they call that halacha, where do you make the distinction between something established for the Sanhedrin and something that was just an idea of Rabbi Avi Weiss?
Right. So this is really a major point of debate. I think that even for YU and YCT, even for YCT, as what they call the open orthodoxy, is still a problem, and that is the belief that since the time of the Sanhedrin, nothing can change, right? And I think I wrote about it in one of the articles, and that is that we have to ask ourselves, what is the source of the authority of the rabbis, right? Where do they take it from? So okay, which says, "Lo tasur min hadavar she'yerutchem minu smol," right? And we also say that they were allowed. This is in their interpretation of the law, so that we don't change. We accept whatever, and that's the difference. Some people don't understand when we speak about biblical law versus rabbinical law. They think this is being Karaite. No, it's not. Karaites have a different interpretation of the written law. We have to accept the rabbinical interpretation of the biblical law. Whatever is written, they say this is the interpretation. We accept it. However, when it comes to the areas that they clearly define as additions, takanot, minhagot, gezerot, all these things, right? That's why we ask the question: what was the source of their power to create those takanot? And they said it very clearly: "Asu mishmeret le'mishmarti," make a fence around the Torah to protect the Torah. So here, I think there's an essential divide between two different schools of thought. But I don't think that anyone takes it far enough in terms to understand how can we correct the situation. One school of thought looks at it as this is the protecting the Torah. There's this sort of a metaphysical entity called Torah, which has to be observed in its totality. And as long as this is done, it's like the brisker hiluk between hefta and gavra, right? So they will say it's about the hefta, or the essence of the Torah. The Torah must be observed, and as long as there is even one person around the world who observes the Torah in its totality, everything is okay. Like the Torah is protected. The other point of view, this is what I believe in, is that when the rabbis say we want to protect the Torah, they meant we want to make sure that as many people as possible will observe the Torah. That's the idea. Vitem li kohanim, vitem li segula, and mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. You have to be able to pass the Torah on to the future generations. There's no benefit in having one person keeping all the halachot as I mentioned them. So if this is the case, we need as many people to observe the Torah as possible. So if the rabbi would have come back to life today, they would have looked around and say, something went wrong. We made takanot to ensure that 90% of the Jewish people, or 50% of the Jewish people will be observant. Instead, we look around us and we see that only 5% or 15% they find themselves as observant. What happened? Where did we go wrong? Or they say, okay, the takanot worked for 200-300 years, but now we relied on the rabbis who will come after us in 200, 300, 400 years to evaluate and adjust them. And they made the takana. They made the rule. Right? But when you come with this argument, when you tell the rabbis of today, here's the takana that they will say, our tzibur ken yechol la'amod ba.
Where were you before Magen David?
From Israel. In Israel I went to a modern yeshiva high school, and then I went to a kollel for a couple of years, and then through Rabbi Cassin was an intermediary. I landed in Colombia, in Bogota.
Do you mean Rabbi Katzim from the Sephardic Center? Because I learned an age. And I would stop by there because I used to work for Jeff Seidel. And that's kind of also Ben Gurion University. We would makarv people in Hebrew U, Tel Aviv U, and Ben Gurion, try to take them to programs. Uh-huh. But, Shecha Bar Yeshiva. And I lived in Israel for 5 years, and I'd stop in once in a while.
Okay.
He has an interesting shita because Sam Kassin is a Syrian Jew, but I don't think he supports the takana. He had a more open-minded approach to people who didn't accept the Zohar as something authoritative.
But you're right, he is not in favor of the takana, but he asks his students, wherever they go, not to be involved in conversions.
In terms of how I view halakha, and this is how I teach it. I teach halakha. Well, first let me explain what I think Judaism is. I think Judaism is ultimately just Torah Shebektav and Torah Shebal Peh. Now the question is, what is Torah Shebal Peh? The Rambam in Hilchos Marmon, he says, Beizin HaGadol Sheber Yerushalayim Hem Iker Torah Shebal Peh. That the Beizin HaGadol, from the Lishkat HaGazit, they develop halakha. Now, there's different midrashim here and there that introduce ideas like halacha l'Moshe Sinai. I have no problem with that. The Rambam limits it to 30 laws that were given to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, but other rabbis disagree on what he considers halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So we could all agree that Parshat Shoftim, the mitzvah lo tasur, of not straying from what they instruct us, is where they get their authority. But it's mamash from the Lishkat HaGazit. So the question is, and this is kind of delving a little more deeper into it, if people who didn't have authentic smicha could ultimately change halakha. And I think that's what you're touching on here. What was the actual authority of the Amoraim versus the Tanaim? Mind you, the Amoraim didn't have actual smicha, but being that they were the direct students of actual Tanaim, their words were there to unlock the previous statements. So it's not just tossed away. But that itself should not be called halakha. In other words, if someone is expounding on something said in the Mishnah nowadays, trying to make it applicable nowadays, for example, I'm not saying that it's 100% that the Sanhedrin, if it existed today, would be 100% in favor of allowing people to use electricity or not. I'm saying that by the fact that we don't know, because we don't have a Sanhedrin, we can't be judged. For sure, it wouldn't be a Torah violation. Right. There is a statement in Mishneh Torah that people were allowed to cook on Shabbat. The bishul is not the issue because they would go to the waters of Tiberia and they would cook in streams. So then the rabbis made a prohibition on this, saying that they know that it wasn't a Doraita issue, but they just prohibit it just in case someone might come to cook with fire. It's very similar to cooking with the sun. Even though they made these prohibitions, they were always very careful to make a distinction between what's from the Torah and what's from the rabbis. And they laid down the principle of Safek D'Rabbanan Lehakel or Safek D'Oraita L'Chumra. There's always separation. And that's what keeps us progressing here, at least from an academic level. So if a rabbi nowadays says, you're allowed to do this, it's the halakha. I have a problem with that instead of saying it's gray area and it's kind of like a free-for-all. Here, for example, I'm not quick to call it, say, all Messianic Judaism Avodah Zarah. Why? Because it's basically built off the opinion of the Rambam, which I deeply admire and adhere to. But there's a famous statement in Hilchos Tshuva that he talks about anyone who believes that Hashem Mamish has a body, I mean, not basar v'dam, but just a shape, that person will lose his chelik in Olam Haba. And then steps in the Ravid and he says, who do you think you are, Moshe, when rabbis bigger than you believe that God had a body? That he's basically talking about Tosfos and the European rabbis.
And then all that, right.
Right. The students of Rashi. And Rashi himself.
Right. Hasidei Ashkenaz.
Rabbi Mark Shapiro wrote a book called The Limits of Orthodoxy. Great book.
Mm-hmm.
Attacking with the Yud Gimel Karamuna. He was really a Das Yachid in a lot of the things he proposed. Right. So even the Rambam fell into this. So people even have a problem in quoting Mishneh Torah only because it appears as Halacha Aleph or Halacha Beis. Only because it appears in that format doesn't mean it's an actual Halacha.
Right.
Mishneh Torah is probably 3% the opinions of the Rambam. Here, for example, smicha nowadays. Everyone makes a big deal who has smicha, who doesn't have smicha. So smicha nowadays, as you know, was invented in Sfat by the Maribe Rav in 1538. Off the Shita of the Rambam. It's just his opinion. He says, it seems to me that if you have the vast majority of Chachamim deciding to establish smicha, then they could give it to one person and on and on. Well, they didn't have the vast majority was support of the rabbis, but they did it anyways. So nowadays, people walk around thinking that if you disagree with someone who has this ceremonial smicha is like being over on the prohibition of lo sasor. So this is why I don't like people saying halacha or using that word for anything that's ultimately just opinion, because at the end of the day, they fail to make a distinction on bigger issues. And you have people putting people in a chayrim or kol koreh or some bad position just because they happen to disagree with the opinions of Rabbi Mashash or the Ben Ish Chai.
Right. Yeah, I hear. But all that depends. That's where, if we go into historical evidence, it all depends on accepting the description of the Sanhedrin and the Samicha as the Rambam describes it, and as he took it from the Mishnah. Because we have no evidence throughout Beit Rishon and most of Beit Sheni that this existed. That's the biggest problem. That to me is the biggest problem. Where do we have a Sanhedrin from the 70 elders of the time of Moshe to the statement about Shimon HaTzadik Misharei Knesset HaGedolah?
Even outside of Josephus.
Where are all these?
Josephus mentions, I don't think he counts as 70 or 120 or.
Around Josephus' time, yes. Yeah, but that he records events of maybe 100, 200 years old. So it all starts at about 100 years before the Common Era. But what was before that? That's the question. So where does it pop up from? That's a big problem. That to me is the key. And that, God forbid, you can't mention it to anyone in the Orthodox circle. That you can even think that. But you ask yourself, really, where you have hundreds and thousands of rabbis that were supposed to be active, from the time of at least Shivat Zion, to the time of the Mishnah. We know no one by name, no one by action. Who were they? What did they do? What did they write? Then you have in Masechet Sanhedrin discussion of Bedin Torah. Now, what is the Bedin Torah? It says Ma'aseh Bebat Kohen Shezinta Ve'viu Havilei Zmorot U'Safua. Really, you don't. How can there be such a mistake of not knowing the right method of execution? They would have thought that this is what the Bedin must know exactly the tradition. So there are a lot of holes in the story, and when you say that a lot of the things that Rambam says are da'at yachid, or his own opinion, I think that one of the most important areas to look at is his Hakdama, because in the Hakdama he goes into describing the history of Halakha, right? And that's where he says that one of the most important thing that he changes, in my opinion, is the way he refers to the Geonim. That's the tricky part, because after a certain point, it's obvious that the Geonim are Geonei Bavel, right? Geonei Shin'ar, what he calls.
Right.
But
From
then,
Surah and Pemvita.
right, but then he says, he calls Hakmei Sfarad v'Tzarfat, v'kol ha'aratzot, he calls them Geonim. The moment he calls them Geonim, he elevates himself to the level of the Geonim who could argue to an extent with the Talmud, even though they don't establish new halachot, or that future generations cannot argue with them, even though they don't, some, they have certain authority, even though it's not like global authority for all Jewish communities. So that's an interesting statement. Also, the statement regarding the Aricha of Zamudim, a lot of things that are presented as historical facts in the introduction of Rambam don't have really what to rely on, especially if you compare it to Igeret Rav Sheri Ragaon and to some evidence in the Midrashim, in the Talmudim. So that's an interesting issue. That's where to me, you know what, I accept that. I don't need to fight or to argue over the definition of.
You're treading on forbidden ground here, by the way. Everything you're saying, that you're breaking new ground for anyone listening. This is stuff that I also think about. And mind you, I'm against the errors, by the way. Errors of like Achronim and Rishonim.
Yes.
You said the Rambam considered himself one of the Geonim. When we know, like, the Geonim were just two heads of the two yeshivot in Bavel.
Right.
Maybe he considered himself a Gaon, like an Ilui, just like a very wise person or a genius, and not as one of the actual Geonim. Not that the actual Geonim could create anything, but like most people don't know that every time whether they pray Shachris, the Siddur they're using is the Siddur of Amram Gaon. Now, they established a prayer for us. I think the Gemara only limits us to the first 3 brachot and the 3 last brachot, and everything else is just improvising. When Nefilat Apayim and Tachanun, it's pretty much made up. Everything pretty much comes from the Geonim in terms of practice. For sure, like in the literature.
You have the Savoraim, nobody knows exactly what they did with it.
Well, they compiled the Gemara, like just how the MRM compiled the
So that's what we have. We have a really a gray zone in our tradition on everything that happened within the Mishnah and it's really, there are so many holes. One of the projects I'm working on right now just for myself, I'm looking into that, statement that we studied as an axiom, that the Mishnah was edited by Rabbi Nasi to the point of perfection, right? That you have to be medayek every milah. Every word is there for a purpose. So I'm doing now this exercise with Masechet Shabbat to re-edit it, to say, what if Rabbi Nasi would have edited the Mishnah, right? Why do you have to say, for example, in Hilchot Hotza'ah, I think it's 6 and 8 chapters, Amotzi Amir kiplo pigdi, Atza kiplo gigamal, right? Each food according to the animal that eats it. Just say one general rule, Amotzi ochel kefi ota haya ochelet oto, right? Enough. You have to bring 100 examples. And the Mishnah is not economic.
I can see how this is dangerous also, to a certain extent.
Oh, definitely. I know it's very dangerous.
I know, but sometimes it's better in areas that don't affect anything ethical in our society, but they just affect chulin or areas of practical law.
No, I'm talking to you as a scholar. I'm not talking, this is not something that I'm, but as a scholar, you look at this.
If you're working on a book, many people could use this to, in some way...
Oh, yeah. It will be published at a certain point.
They could drop Torah Shabbat Peh on this basis. Which is why, I limit what we can accept as metaphysical to anything found in Torah Shabbat Ktav alone. Because that's the issue most people have with Chazal. Most people don't have an issue with how to keep Shabbat or how to keep Yom Kippur. Their biggest issue are with metaphysical statements made by our sages. And mind you, I believe that the Sadducees did not deny Torah Shabbat Peh. And there's many rabbis who teach on this idea. By the simple fact that the Mishnah teaches they had their own Sanhedrin. They believed, in a society back then, where you have to believe in civil law and the authority of judges to establish civil law, but their issue was what we call Midrash and Agadah nowadays. They had an issue with people developing halachot out of nowhere. Even though those halachot were still binding under Lo Tasur, it's still problematic. And I sympathize with their plight. And of course, when Christian scholars took with the text of Josephus and even the New Testament, they made it sound like these guys were against Torah Shabbat Peh. They developed Torah Shabbat Peh. Every argument between Sadducees and Pharisees and the Divrei Sofrim are always on halachic issues. They themselves believed and established halakha. This is why I don't explain what authority the actual Sanhedrin had after when they moved from Har HaBayit, because these are things that will ultimately hurt people and not help them. The average person who has an issue with halakha, or like with the rabbis, has an issue because of some statement, because of what's called a garata, not because of halachot, because I think everyone agrees that we need a system in place to help us keep progressing in an ethical fashion socially. I could see how delving too much into a certain issue like this could actually hurt the Jewish community and not benefit it.
That's why I don't go there in my writings. I just, but if you ask me deep, right, deep inside, I know that a lot of rabbis are what we call yirei orah. They're afraid to issue a ruling because they're afraid they're going to transgress something. I know that this is not going to happen as long as we don't transgress the Torah shebichtav the way the rabbis interpreted it. We're good. So I have greater flexibility, and I see that it helps people, and that's what I do.
How do you feel about how conversions are dealt with nowadays?
I think that we are. This is really an overall required to reevaluate everything that we do, to look at cases of the past, to see where people are. We should probably go more to what Rambam says. Rambam is the Gemara. And that's it. That's what you need to do.
For the Shulchan quotes the Rambam verbatim, and the Rambam quotes Yevamos verbatim. That's the actual makor for this. People nowadays saying, "Oh, it's a complicated sugya. I'm not a rabbi. I can't tell you." But okay.
It's so simple.
Right. There's one page.
It's so simple. They can't deal with simplicity. Rabbi Akiva, so interesting is that he's like the author of our Torah Sheba'al Peh, according to many opinions. He's influenced heavily. And the article that I sent today, I put a link to something that I wrote about the Omer, but it shows that Rabbi Akiva had a complicated system, not a complicated, like a comprehensive system of converting people. First, he ruled that someone who converted by himself is a convert. Right? He says, Goy sheitgayer beno leben atzmo chayav mita al Shabbat, like that. If it was on a chayav Shabbat, it's chayav mita. In other words, the giyur is valid. Then, so that already sets the stage. We understand where so many people joined the rebellion, because Rabbi Akiva traveled everywhere. He would convert one person and send him back to his people. Say, okay, now you go and carry on with that. And then he issued two other halachot that would make it very worthwhile to convert and very silly not to. And that is that he said that the child of a Jewish woman and a non-Jewish man is a mamzer. In his da'at yachid, in his outruled, is overruled. But so the Bat Yisrael wouldn't think, oh, I'm a Jewish mother, they'll be okay. He says, no, you're running the risk of making your child a mamzer. It's better for you to convert your future husband. On the other hand, he says that Kohen is not forbidden to marry a convert. So he says that once there's a conversion, even the Kohen can marry. And if there's no conversion, even Bat Yisrael will have a mamzer, a child. So he made it very profitable to convert and very unprofitable not to. And he went and he physically converted people. So looking at today's situation in America, we know there's a simulation. Everybody decries that. So imagine that people would go to universities, just offer the option. Everybody's searching for religiosity. That's the age that people are on a spiritual quest.
I want you to know that I'm not into trying to convert people that when they live in a community that where they can have a conversion, where they can make aliyah and be recognized by the Rabbanut and all that stuff. That's what I push for. And I push people to have the most recognized conversion. Even if Rabbi Ovadia Yosef will convert you, someone is going to say that you're still a goy.
Yeah.
The conversions that I've performed in the past are for people who live in the middle of nowhere, who want to start their own community.
Yes.
I tell them, first of all, I don't charge anything. It costs me money, because I have to marry them, I have to buy a ketubah and all that stuff, right? But I tell them, like, if you really want to be Jewish, because people always say, when they repeat all these statements, Akum Shesharat Chayat Mita, but that if they keep Shabbat, they're liable for the death penalty because they're not Jewish yet. So I'm like, okay, fine. Here, show them this certificate. Right? To see if that shuts them up. And that's pretty much like what we did for the community in Ecuador. That we went down to Guayaquil and we established Rabbi Kolakowski. I brought people from different branches. Like a Satmar Chassid, a Sephardi rabbi. So no one could say that it's just like, whatever. According to the Shulchan Aruch, a conversion is valid with 2 witnesses b'diavad. Fine. And they still call them Goyim. It's a shame that when someone like me speaks about the issue, they'll be like, of course, because he's a convert too. They'll say, because I'm a convert, I have like an axe to grind here. And I'm not doing it because I'm a convert. Here, mind you, I don't believe it's an actual chovah to go out and convert people or encourage them. I just think it's a good idea. Just like there's no halacha to makarev with secular Jews to Judaism. It's just a great idea. Now, mind you, the Rambam, in Sefer Mitzvot, in the 3rd mitzvah, he says, how do you let me fulfill the mitzvah of loving Hashem? He says by doing what Avraham Avinu did in Haran. So other Meforshim teach that he was Megar Gerim, but it says to bring them to his understanding. Now, clearly, he didn't have the Torah Mitzvot, but he was in a Brit, with Hashem. There's something more, he was more than just a Ben Noach. Right? It's ultimately just a good idea. Right? And nowadays, you have all these Christians trying to become Jewish. I think if you just knock Yashka out of them, you have a full Torah-keeping Jew. This is why I attack Kabbalah so much. And I don't have a problem with people believing Kabbalah, but I have a problem when people call a statement in the Zohar Torah Shebal Peh. And if you disagree with the statement in the Zohar, you're a heretic. Right? So Kabbalah invented this idea. Right? Kabbalah invented the idea of a Jewish soul. Not just a soul, but mamish, a Jewish soul.
I think it started from Rabbi Levi already,
In the Kuzari, he mentions this whole distinction between Jews being intrinsically superior to Gentiles. Of course, it is not. Even Gilgulim predated the Zohar. We see the Rasag being commented. But these ideas permeated Judaism. But the problem is, the Zohar made popular, and for sure where the Arizal made the Zohar popular, and the Tanya made the Arizal popular, on the idea that a Jew is special, apart from what he believes and how those beliefs shape his behavior. I just had a discussion with a member of Kach, this guy named Rabbi Moshe Perry. He broke it down so simple. He said if you put a Jewish baby and a Gentile baby on the table, that Jewish baby at that point is already head and shoulders above that Gentile baby spiritually. So if you believe this, if you really believe this, then of course anyone coming to convert, you're going to throw the book at them. Because you're thinking, it's my duty to protect the Jewish people from someone who could be part of the heir of Rav.
To say the word, it's from contamination. It's racism.
I tell them, if Jews are so special, why is it that from ethnic Jews, from ethnic-born Jews, why is it that 54% of them are atheists? The most popular atheists in the world, Carl Sagan, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, all these people were born Jews. Hugh Hefner is a halachic born Jew. Why is it that we see this in society? And then they say, it's because they have a double, triple Yetzer Hara on them because they're so holy. That's why they do such evil things. So you can't win. If they do bad, they're good. If they do good, they're good. So instead of saying the only thing that makes us different from a Gentile is Torah. That's it. So if a Gentile takes Torah, you're increasing Israel.
My article today, the email I sent today was exactly about that, about the chosen people and this, titled Tzelem Elokim.
That's my main issue with Chabad. The whole Yechi stuff doesn't bother me. But the first parak of the Tanya, saying when the Shamot of Goyim come from the Sitra Achra and from the unclean Klipot, if any other group would say the same things, they would properly be called bigoted. But why do we get away with it? It's a problem. That's where a lot of the controversy comes from.
Yeah, that's where they touch on Christianity also. They get well together.
What are your opinions on the Noahide laws? The Noahide movement, better.
I'm not so fond of it. I don't know that there is this is another issue. Again, we go into rabbinic territory, right? I would say that there are universal laws of social justice, but not, I don't know if I look at them as B'nai Noach law. So, my opinion on that probably would be that we should strive to have as many people behave in a manner that brings tikkun olam as much as possible. That's it. And not look at it as we can force other people, they don't adhere to our religion to behave the way our religion demands from them. I think that's, either you offer them to join our religion or let them live in legal.
The way I understand the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, mind you, it's just, I think, one page in the Gemara that talks about what is liable on a Ger Toshav. All right, someone says they have to keep all the mitzvot minus that they could eat nevela, and some just teach that they have to keep 7. All right, so what's made it popular nowadays is, it's pretty much the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva and Hilchos Malachim says that if someone keeps the Sheva Mitzvot because it was given Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, he's considered one of the Chasidei Umot Ha'olam. So this is used by Chabad, saying why? They teach it as an alternative to conversion. When someone comes to convert, they don't do what it says in a Sirabiyah or in Yeridei of the Shulchan Aruch. They say, why would you want to convert when you could just keep Sheva Mitzvot and still get a Chelik on Olam Haba? Now, mind you, the halacha is clear. The halacha is that we tell them the opposite. We tell them, don't you know, right, that only Israel has a share in the world to come. Nowhere in the halacha says that you offer another system as an alternative, right?
But that stems directly from the first paragraph of the Tanya that you quoted. You don't want sort of contamination, so that's a good excuse.
Right, so they're actually breaking the halakha. Now, I accept, for sure, what the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach is part of halakha. Not for us, obviously, but in terms of how we adjudicate Gentiles living on Jewish lands. Because the halakha is, first of all, you can't even make a ger toshav unless the Yovel year is being kept. Some people say what that means, Yom HaMashiach, right? It's not now. All of Hilchot Melachim is really for Yom HaMashiach. The Sanhedrin developed these laws to adjudicate how we treat Gentiles, how we judge Gentiles if they're living amongst Israel. And even the Rambam says that you can only accept them when the Yovel year is kept, although the Kesef Mishnah disagrees there, and then everyone jumps on that saying, well, now you can make Noahides all over the world. So there's many Midrashim that step in and say that, oh no, the first 6 laws were given to Adam HaRishon and the last one was given to Noach. And people ran with this and created a new religion out of it. And mind you, one of the prohibitions on the Goyim is not to create a religion off of this system, that if they want anything more, well, they just become Jewish. Nowadays, it's considered like the 4th house of Israel. And they say this. Whether you have Kohanim, you have Leviim, you have Israel, and now you have Noahides. But their whole existence is built on a debate. Because mind you, not all of Chazal believed that a Goy, not only didn't have a Chelik on Olam Haba, but even if they would partake in Techiyat HaMeitim. This is all speculation. So when somebody comes looking for the truth, who has already accepted the Torah as true, it would behoove you to nudge him, to push him the rest of the way. The Rambam says that from the outset, we draw him forth with kind words and bonds of love, and we don't overburden him with too many of the mitzvot, lest he go back to the bad path he came from and not stay on the right path here, which is becoming Jewish. But it's a shame that I'm the only one, at least online, who teaches us till now. But it's not, I have rabbis too, I just can't quote them because they're going to be harassed.
Which rabbi?
I have rabbis who teach this also. Rabbi Kolakowski teaches this. Yes. Like in Israel, I lived 5 years in Israel. I started proselytizing in Israel because I worked in Hebrew University. I worked for Jeff Seidel. I don't know if you know who Jeff Seidel is.
Yes.
Yeah, Jeff Seidel is the Kotel guy. The guy, he sets people up for Shabbat. He has student centers in all the major Israeli universities. But every time that we'd have an event in Hebrew U, for the overseas students, we'd always get more non-Jews than born Jews. And Christians. People who were just interested in hearing a class like by Ari Khan or, like one of the local Jerusalem rabbis. And the question is, what do we do with all these people? So then I asked the question to the Rosh Hashiva of the Derek program in Or Sameach. I was learning an Eish. I'm an Eish Bacher, but I learned in Or Sameach. And he wrote me a letter saying that there's nothing wrong with encouraging a non-Jew to consider becoming Jewish, as long as you focus on Jews first. He said clear because they'll have a bigger chelik on Olam Haba if they become Jewish. I don't know, if I agree with that statement in terms of for a reason for doing it instead of that we're all going to benefit on this planet by more people keeping Torah. But I had my permission to do what I wanted to do. Not that I needed permission. I don't think it was against halakha to begin with. But nowadays, if it's not documented, it's like,
Right.
Right. So then in Israel, I started my organization, BeJewish.org. And because I worked out of Hebrew U in the Old City, I started putting posters up in the Old City. In the Rova. But there's all these, places where everyone, puts up like flyers and stuff. And I said, you're in the holiest city of the world. All this could be yours, right? Consider becoming Jewish. And I just laid down some books they can read. And I created a website called BeJewish.org. And that's it. Now, mind you, every time I put up one of these posters, in the last 30 minutes, somebody tore it down. Over and...
Of course, you're in the Lova.
Yeah,
you have
for sure.
Yeah. I just want to let you know, I know nothing of all that, being attacked or anything like that. I saw some of your halakha videos, and I like the way you analyze halakha. And, and even if I knew that, I'm actually that someone is being attacked, it makes him more credible, in my opinion, in most cases.
In Israel, it's not an issue. When I talk to Israelis about this, they're like, wow, this is a great idea. Of course, the more Jews, the better. It only becomes an issue when you come to America. Right? Here, it's kind of like everyone is suspicious of everything you do. Because I'm a convert, it's easy to question my conversion or question my smicha. I mean, they defame instead of debate. I don't really attack any particular rabbi. I mean, I'll attack ideologies or I'll challenge an ideology. Who are you to challenge a gadol? My rabbi says this. Right. Do you think you know more than my rabbi? So that's what we all deal with here.
I know that. Mm-hmm.
But what is your opinion on later mystical writings? What level of authority do you attribute to Sefer HaBahir, with the Zohar, what I consider pseudepigrapha, Kol HaTorah, and on and on?
Later than what? HaBahir is probably before the Zohar.
Later than ultimately the closing of the Mishnah.
Oh, we don't have anything, mystical in the time of the Mishnah. That's a myth.
It was Sefer Yetzirah, no?
Sefer Yetzirah is probably also, the language and everything is probably Geonim. That's the period. My opinion, I find a very, coming from a sort of like a mystical family. My great-grandfather, I told you, was in the Kubal, and it runs in the family. My way to deal with it, for now, very simply, my way to deal with it is the way my grandfather used to speak about it. He said this. He said, you should view all the halachot that are mentioned in the poskim or anywhere as stemming from Kabbalah as something that pertains only to the true Mekubalim, to someone who's not just studying Kabbalah as a textbook, but who lives his life with I would say, the ability to reach deep mystical levels, or whatever this is. And if you're not there, then there's nothing there for you. Just give the halakha, it's his pshat, and that's it.
But if someone is there,
I don't mix.
They're going to attempt to teach it. If someone is on that level, what's going to stop them from attempting to teach it or build a school around it, and then that school start excluding others?
Nothing stops them. Right, nothing stops them. That's a problem, He was not exclusive. He definitely was very concerned about the Kabbalah, not Kabbalah subject, it wasn't at this time, but he was totally opposed to the Sulam. He was against it. Maybe I believe that he saw the potential danger of the Sulam, and how people will take it and use it their way. And that was one of the things that he warned me about, the Sulam. And he also warned me about some rabbis that he thought had the potential to create danger. I can't mention them by name publicly. What he meant by saying that is that just like rabbinic wisdom, Kabbalah is supposed to change a person. Kabbalah is not just names dropping like you have today. Rachel is Gevurah, Leah din Kashet, this din Rafeh, Yitzhak, Yaakov Emet. This is still that you don't become a Kabbalist by reciting Kabbalistic formulas, right? So that's what he used to believe in, and that's where I stand. So I don't delve too much into Kabbalah.
So you believe someone could create like Pulse of the Nora or whatever?
I don't believe in it.
Now,
I don't believe in the Post of the Noah or the Ain Hara or anything like that.
the way I view Kabbalah with the Zohar, with Sefer Bahir, and other mystical writings is just on the level of Agadata. In other words, just like there's many midrashim that can help, that can hurt. For example, like in the Hagdabah to Ein Yaakov, everyone uses Avram ben Arambam's, introduction to Agadah, saying that anyone who accepts all this, mamash is true, is crazy, and anyone who thinks it's all garbage is also foolish. It's just subjective literature.
Right,
But cool. All right, man. I mean, I appreciate what you do.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay,
I appreciate it. Okay. Bye-bye.